Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're exploring one of the most intense and thought-provoking scenarios imaginable. What if the east and west sides of the United States went to war against each other? This is not a prediction, not a wish, and not a political message. It's simply a strategic, historical, and hypothetical breakdown of a situation that would dramatically reshape the country and the world. By looking at geography, population, economy, military strength, infrastructure, and long-term outcomes, we can understand how such a conflict would unfold and what it would mean for the future of America. When imagining a division of the United States into an eastern and western bloc, the first thing to understand is geography. The United States is not a flat, empty surface. It's divided by major terrain features such as the Rocky Mountains, the Mississippi River, and vast deserts in the southwest. These natural barriers would shape front lines, defensive positions, supply routes, and strategies. The West, dominated by states like California, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico, would hold the Pacific coast. The Carolinas, and the entire Midwest stretching to the Mississippi, would control the Atlantic coastline and the major urban, economic belt stretching from Boston down to Miami. Geography itself would become a powerful ally to both sides. Population would be a key factor. The East holds a significantly larger population overall. Major urban centers like New York City, Chicago, Philadelphia, Atlanta, and Miami create demographic strength and massive labor power. A larger population means more potential soldiers, more production capability, and more manpower for logistics and infrastructure. The West, however, has a unique population advantage of its own. Cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Phoenix, and Denver are hubs of technology, aerospace, entertainment, and high-level innovation. Although smaller in total population, the West's demographic distribution includes highly skilled workers, engineers, scientists, and developers who could shift the technological advantage in conflict. Economically, both sides would initially be powerful, but the nature of their economies would shape the conflict differently. The East controls major financial centers, especially New York City and its massive stock exchange and banking operations. Trade along the Atlantic would connect the East to Europe, Africa, and South America. The industrial Midwest would be able to mobilize factories, manufacturing plants, automotive centers, steel production, and agricultural output on a large scale. The East's economy might be more traditional, but extremely powerful in logistics, manufacturing, and finance. The West, on the other hand, contains Silicon Valley, the world's leading center of high-tech innovation, digital infrastructure, software, and advanced research. The West also dominates much of the United States film, TV, and entertainment industry, shaping global media influence. Meanwhile, aerospace hubs in California and Washington play a massive role in satellite systems, aviation, and cutting-edge defense technologies. The West's economy would be more technological, innovative, and agile, while the East's economy would be larger, more industrial, and more financially dominant. Energy resources would play a major role. The East possesses significant natural gas production in states like Pennsylvania and West Virginia. The Gulf of Mexico region contributes heavily to oil and refining. The Midwest provides massive amounts of corn-based ethanol and agricultural power. The West, meanwhile, has significant renewable energy capacity with solar power in California, Nevada, and Arizona, along with hydroelectric power from the Pacific Northwest. Both sides would attempt to secure energy independence early in the conflict. as fuel and electricity would drive both military and civilian survival. When considering military strength, the United States military cannot realistically be split evenly. Instead, forces located within each region at the start of the hypothetical conflict would determine the initial balance. The East has major military bases such as Fort Bragg, Norfolk Naval Base, and multiple Air Force and Army facilities. Norfolk Naval Base remains the largest naval station in the world, giving the East a major advantage on the Atlantic. The East also contains huge National Guard numbers and reserves scattered across densely populated regions. The West, however, controls strategic bases like Naval Base, San Diego, Edwards Air Force Base, Nellis Air Force Base, and numerous Marine Corps installations along the Pacific. The Pacific Fleet provides access to one of the most powerful naval groups on Earth. The West also houses a large percentage of the nation's advanced aerospace testing facilities, giving them rapid adaptation to new aircraft technologies, drones, and cyber systems. The Mississippi River would become a natural dividing line early in the conflict. It is a massive, difficult-to-cross, strategically significant barrier running from Minnesota to the Gulf of Mexico. Control of the river would be essential for moving goods, troops, and resources. The Midwest, stretching from Ohio to Missouri, would likely become the primary battleground of the early phase of the war. This region includes open plains, farmland, and small cities, making it ideal for armored divisions, large troop movements, and extended supply lines. Both sides would fight to control key transportation hubs like St. Louis, Chicago, Memphis, and Minneapolis. The West would rely heavily on air power and long-range missile systems to compensate for its smaller population. Precision, guided systems, drone swarms, and cyber capabilities would become a major part of Western strategy. The East, with its larger industrial base, would likely focus on mass production of vehicles, artillery, ammunition, and other conventional weapons. The East could field larger armies, but the West could potentially field more technologically advanced ones. The outcome would depend on strategy, attrition, and the ability to disrupt the other side's supply chains and infrastructure. Food production could determine long-term sustainability. The Midwest, controlled mostly by the East, produces enormous amounts of corn, wheat, soybeans, dairy, beef, and other critical agricultural goods. This would give the East an advantage in feeding both its civilians and its military forces. The West, although less agriculturally dominant, still has major food production areas in California's Central Valley, one of the most productive agricultural zones in the world. But California's agriculture depends heavily on water, which would become a strategic vulnerability if infrastructure or supply systems were disrupted by war. The naval dimension would be particularly interesting. The East would control the Atlantic and Caribbean Sea, giving it access to European allies and trade networks. The West would dominate the Pacific and could potentially align with Asian markets and industries. Both sides would try to maintain open sea lanes, but naval clashes between the Pacific Fleet and Atlantic Fleet would be extremely destructive and could reshape world geopolitics. The West might experiment with autonomous naval drones, while the East could use its larger fleet numbers to maintain blockades or protect vital shipping routes. Cyber warfare would be another decisive factor. The West has most of the tech giants, cybersecurity firms, and advanced AI labs. This means the West could rapidly develop cyber weapons, disrupt enemy communication networks, attack infrastructure, and gather intelligence. The East, however, has major intelligence and defense agencies financial institutions, and communication networks. Cyber attacks from either side could cause blackouts, transportation shutdowns, and large-scale confusion. The cyber battlefield might even become more important than the physical battlefield. Infrastructure would face immediate threat. Major highway systems, power lines, railroads, airports, and communication networks would become central targets. The East, with its dense urban centers, would struggle to protect cities like New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. from missile strikes or cyber attacks. Massive population density makes these cities vulnerable. The West cities such as Los Angeles, Seattle, and San Francisco, while technologically advanced, are clustered along the coastline, making them vulnerable to naval and air assaults. Supply chains would determine survival. The East would have an easier time moving goods through its dense network of highways, shipping lanes, and railways. The West, with wider distances between population centers, would need to heavily rely on air transport and protected supply corridors. However, the West would quickly accelerate innovations in logistics automation, drone delivery, and rapid manufacturing. The East might dominate traditional logistics, while the West would pioneer advanced logistics solutions. As both sides suffered immense losses, diplomacy would begin to play a role. Allies around the world would react unpredictably. Some nations might try to support one side over the other for economic, political, or strategic reasons. Europe might lean toward the East because of financial connections, while Asia might value the West because of Pacific ties and technological partnerships. But most global powers would try to avoid becoming entangled in what would be the most destructive internal conflict in modern history. Economically, the United States war would cause huge global disruption. Stock markets would collapse, trade networks would be interrupted, and energy prices would skyrocket. Countries dependent on American exports or imports would face immediate crises. The dollar would weaken dramatically, and the global financial system would struggle to remain stable. In the long term, both the East and West would face economic depression unless the conflict resolved quickly. The war would also involve ideological and cultural divisions. The East and West each have different social norms, political tendencies, cultural influences, and economic priorities. During wartime, these differences would magnify. Propaganda campaigns would emerge from both sides, promoting unity within their region while emphasizing the opposing side's weaknesses. Social media would become a battlefield of information and disinformation. Public morale would be shaped by digital narratives, rumors, and psychological operations. In a prolonged conflict, both sides would face resource shortages. The East might struggle with energy and high-tech materials needed for advanced electronics. The West might struggle with food supply and industrial equipment. Rationing, emergency production, and black markets would become part of everyday life. Civilians would face hardships similar to those seen in major historical conflicts, including displacement, shortages, and economic instability. Military strategies would evolve rapidly. The West would likely push for air superiority early in the war. Controlling the skies would allow them to strike deep into Eastern territory and disrupt manufacturing centers. Their drone fleets and cyber weapons would aim to paralyze Eastern communication networks. Meanwhile, the East would focus on overwhelming force, large infantry numbers, armored divisions, artillery firepower, and control of key geographical choke points. The East's goal would be to push westward across the plains and possibly secure key mountainous passes before the West could fortify them. The Rocky Mountains would become a natural stronghold for the West. Defending mountain passes is easier than defending open fields, meaning the West could stretch out the conflict by using natural terrain for protection. The East would face long supply lines and potentially harsh winter conditions if they attempted mountain assaults. The West's familiarity with high-tech surveillance, drones, and air support would make mountain warfare even more challenging for the East. The air war would be devastating. Both sides possess advanced fighters, bombers, and stealth aircraft. The United States Air Force is among the strongest in the world, but in this scenario, it would be split between regions. The West would likely hold more experimental aircraft and advanced prototypes due to the presence of testing centers. The East would have more aircraft overall and better supply chains for fuel and maintenance. Airfields in the Midwest would become major targets, as controlling them would allow either side to dominate the central theater. As casualties rise, internal political pressure would increase. Civilians on both sides would question the purpose and cost of the conflict. The economic collapse, infrastructure destruction, and loss of life would spark protests, dissent, and calls for negotiation. Leaders on both sides would face extreme pressure to justify their decisions. Eventually, the war might become unsustainable for both sides. If peace negotiations began, the question of reunification or permanent separation would dominate the discussion. A temporary ceasefire might lead to demilitarized zones along major rivers or mountain ranges. International mediators might attempt to broker agreements for trade, energy, and defense. But the emotional scars of the conflict could last decades, shaping future generations. In a long-term outlook, the East and West would face rebuilding challenges unlike anything in American history. Restoring infrastructure, economy, and social unity would take decades. The global perception of the United States would shift permanently, reducing its influence in world affairs. Other nations might rise economically or militarily while America was recovering. Ultimately, in this hypothetical scenario, no side truly wins. Both sides would suffer immense losses, and the country's power, unity, and global leadership would be permanently damaged. The United States became a global superpower because of its unity, cooperation, and shared identity. A division between East and West would destroy that foundation. The lesson in this scenario is that internal conflict between two powerful regions of the same nation has far more to lose than to gain. Despite all the strategic, military, and economic factors, the most important takeaway is that unity is stronger than division. The strength of a nation comes not only from its military or economy, but from its ability to resolve differences without tearing itself apart. This hypothetical war shows how destructive internal conflict could be, and why maintaining national unity is essential for prosperity, stability, and progress.